Before modern logging cranes, before computers, before safety systems slowed everything down, there were yarders so powerful they didn't just move logs. They lifted entire trees off the ground, built with massive drums, brutal cable systems, and engines designed to pull until something gave, usually the forest, not the machine. These vintage yarders were absolute monsters. No finesse, no mercy, just raw lifting power. Today, we're counting down the 10 vintage yarders that could lift entire trees. Machines so strong they rewrote what logging equipment was capable of. Watch closely, because these weren't machines. They were controlled destruction. Number 10. Skagit BU90. The Skagit BU90 is one of those machines that perfectly explains why vintage yarders earned almost mythical reputations among loggers. Built by Skagit Steel and Iron Works, the BU90 was never advertised as a monster tree lifter. On paper, it was a mid-sized yarder designed for tighter settings, shorter spans, and operations where mobility mattered as much as power. In reality, crews quickly discovered that the BU90 could do far more than its size suggested, including lifting entire trees clear off the ground when pushed by experienced operators. What made the BU90 special was not raw horsepower alone, but how massively overbuilt its core components were. The drums were thick and heavy, designed to take repeated shock loads without warping. The gearboxes were conservative in ratio, favoring torque over speed, which meant the skyline could be tensioned hard enough to suspend long stems without hesitation. In steep uphill yarding, especially in second growth but still extremely heavy Douglas fir, operators routinely lifted full tree lengths that modern compact yarders wouldn't even attempt to drag. Another key strength was its tower geometry. The BU90's tower provided enough lift angle to achieve partial or full suspension on short to medium spans. That meant trees could be lifted clear of rocks, stumps, and ravines, reducing hang-ups and breakage. In practice, this often resulted in entire trees being airborne for much of the yarding cycle, a sight that stunned anyone unfamiliar with what the machine could handle. Perhaps the most important factor was trust. Logging crews trusted the BU90 because it was simple. No electronics, no automated safeties, no load limiters stepping in at the wrong moment. The operator was the computer. As long as the rigging was solid and the anchors held, the yarder would pull relentlessly. That simplicity is why many BU90s worked far beyond their intended lifespan, surviving decades in brutal terrain where newer machines failed. Number 9. Link-Belt LS98. The Link-Belt LS98 occupies a unique place in yarder history because it wasn't born purely as a logging machine. Developed by Link-Belt, the LS98 came from a crane lineage, and that heritage is exactly what made it so effective at lifting entire trees rather than simply dragging them. Unlike traditional drum yarders that relied almost entirely on brute pulling force, the LS98 brought controlled vertical lift into logging operations. Its crane-based boom design allowed operators to lift stems vertically before yarding them horizontally. This changed everything in selective logging and sensitive terrain. Instead of ripping trees across the forest floor, entire trees could be picked up, rotated, and carried with minimal ground contact. The LS98 proved especially valuable in mixed hardwood forests and uneven terrain, where hang-ups were constant problems. By lifting the butt end of a tree high into the air, crews could guide massive stems over obstacles that would stop conventional yarders cold. In some settings, entire trees were lifted nearly straight up before being swung toward the landing, a level of control unheard of in earlier cable systems. Another advantage was load stability. Crane-style hoists allowed smoother acceleration and deceleration, reducing shock loads on chokers, cables, and anchors. This not only made lifting whole trees safer, but also extended the life of the rigging, an important factor in remote operations where replacement parts were days away. Despite its strengths, the LS98 demanded skill. Operators had to think three-dimensionally, coordinating lift, swing, and yarding simultaneously. In the wrong hands, it could be inefficient or dangerous. In the right hands, however, it became one of the most capable tree-lifting machines of its era, proof that precision could rival brute force in the forest. Number 8. Thunderbird TMY70. Thunderbird yarders were famous for one thing above all else. They were built as if failure was unacceptable. Manufactured by Thunderbird, The TMY70 embodied this philosophy perfectly. It wasn't compact, it wasn't elegant, and it certainly wasn't easy to move, but once set up, it could lift entire trees in conditions that would terrify most logging crews. The TMY70's defining feature was its massive drum and braking system. These components allowed the skyline to be tensioned to extreme levels without slippage. In downhill yarding, where suspended loads can become dangerously unstable, the TMY70 could hold massive trees motionless in midair while rigging crews adjusted chokers or repositioned loads. Its tall tower geometry provided excellent lift angles, making full suspension not just possible but routine. In old-growth cedar and hemlock stands, entire trees exceeding 100 feet in length were often lifted completely off the ground, minimizing damage and allowing yarding across deep gullies and ravines. The machine's weight was both a curse and a blessing. Moving it required serious planning and heavy transport equipment. But once anchored, that mass worked in the crew's favor. The yarder absorbed shock loads that would twist lighter frames, and its stability reduced the risk of catastrophic failure under peak tension. The TMY70 didn't forgive mistakes, but it rewarded discipline. Crews who respected its power found it capable of lifting trees that redefined what was considered possible in cable logging. Number 7. Browning LBU70. The Browning LBU70 represents the most brutal side of vintage yarding. Built by Browning, this machine wasn't designed to be gentle, safe, or forgiving. It was designed to pull and lift no matter the consequences. The LBU70 was famous for its skyline tension capability. Operators routinely pushed it to levels where cables screamed under strain, lifting entire trees violently into the air. Full suspension was common, but smoothness was not. Trees often snapped upward so fast that debris flew, forcing rigging crews to stay constantly alert. Unlike later machines, the Browning offered minimal refinement. Controls were direct, mechanical, and aggressive. A small lever movement could translate into massive force at the skyline. This made the machine dangerous in inexperienced hands, but devastatingly effective when operated by seasoned yardermen. In steep, short-span settings where finesse mattered less than brute force, the LBU70 thrived. Whole trees were ripped from ravines, lifted clear of rock faces, and slammed onto landings with authority. Many crews described it as angry steel, a machine that felt alive when under load. Although many Browning yarders were eventually retired due to safety concerns and changing regulations, those that survived earned legendary status. They stand as reminders of an era when lifting entire trees was not just possible, it was routine, expected, and terrifyingly normal. Number 6. Madill 071. The Madill 071 is one of those yarders that instantly commands respect from anyone who has worked around skyline systems. Built by Madill, the 071 was engineered specifically for the brutal realities of coastal British Columbia logging, where trees were massive, terrain was steep, and weather punished both machines and crews relentlessly. This was not a yarder designed for average timber. It was built for lifting entire old-growth trees that weighed tens of tons. What separated the Madill 071 from smaller yarders was its extreme structural strength. The frame, drums, and gearboxes were designed to handle skyline tensions that bordered on absurd. In full suspension logging, the 071 could lift entire trees completely off the ground over long distances, allowing logs to fly across ravines, creeks, and unstable slopes. This was critical in coastal rainforests where ground disturbance could cause landslides or destroy access roads. The tower height of the 071 was another defining feature. With greater vertical reach, operators could achieve higher lift angles, reducing drag and minimizing hang-ups. This meant trees arrived at the landing cleaner, with less breakage and fewer delays. In practice, many operations used the 071 to yard multiple stems at once, effectively lifting a small forest in a single cycle. Crews trusted the 071 because it rarely failed under load. If something broke, it was usually the rigging, the anchors, or the trees themselves, not the yarder. Even decades later, retired Madill 071s still sit deep in the forest, rusting quietly where they once ruled entire mountainsides. They remain symbols of an era when machines were built to overpower nature through sheer mechanical dominance. Number 5. Skagit. BU120. If the Skagit BU90 proved that compact yarders could punch above their weight, the Skagit BU120 proved that size and strength could be taken to terrifying extremes. Built by Skagit Steel and Iron Works, the BU120 was designed with one goal in mind: maximum lifting capacity regardless of practicality. This yarder featured enormous drums capable of holding exceptionally thick skyline cable. Those cables could be tensioned so hard that trees didn't just lift, they snapped upward into the air with shocking speed. Entire trees, often still full length, were routinely suspended completely off the ground during yarding. In long-span skyline settings, trees could be carried hundreds of feet without touching soil, rock, or vegetation. The BU120 thrived in extreme terrain where road access was limited and ground-based machines were useless. Ravines, cliffs, and unstable slopes were irrelevant when trees could simply be lifted and flown to the landing. The machine's sheer mass helped absorb shock loads that would destroy lighter yarders, while its conservative gearing delivered relentless pulling force. Operating a BU120 required discipline and respect. Mistakes were unforgiving. A sudden load shift or anchor failure could be catastrophic. But when operated correctly, the BU120 expanded the boundaries of what logging operations considered possible. It wasn't just a yarder, it was a statement that if cable could reach it, the tree could be moved. Number 4. Washington Iron Works High-Lead Yarder. Washington Iron Works built yarders for one environment above all others: the Pacific Northwest's old-growth forests. Manufactured by Washington Iron Works, these high-lead yarders were engineered during a time when trees were taller, thicker, and heavier than anything most modern loggers will ever see. High-lead yarding is brutal. It relies on speed, power, and momentum rather than finesse. Washington Iron Works yarders excelled at this, using massive drums and aggressive line speeds to rip entire trees out of deep ravines and lift them into the air. It wasn't uncommon for these machines to yank trees so violently that roots and soil came with them. What made these yarders legendary was their ability to survive abuse. Frames were massively overbuilt, often reinforced further by logging companies themselves. Drums, brakes, and clutches were designed to take repeated shock loading without failure. These machines ran day after day under conditions that would destroy modern equipment. Entire tree-length stems were routinely lifted and swung through the air, slamming onto landings with incredible force. The machines didn't care, and neither did the crews, as long as production kept moving. Washington Iron Works yarders didn't just lift trees, they reshaped entire landscapes, enabling logging in areas once thought unreachable. They remain icons of an era when logging machines were designed to dominate forests, not negotiate with them. Number 3. Madill 122. The Madill 1222 was not built to operate within normal limits. It was engineered to solve problems that loggers previously considered impossible. Terrain so steep, distances so long, and trees so massive that conventional yarding systems simply failed. Built by Madill, the 122 became one of the most feared and respected skyline yarders ever produced, largely because it could lift entire trees completely off the ground over extreme distances. The defining feature of the Madill 12.2 was its full suspension skyline capability. This machine wasn't dragging logs, it was flying them. With its towering mast and enormous skyline drums, the 122 could tension cables to levels that allowed full tree-length stems to hang freely in mid-air, clearing ravines, creeks, and unstable slopes without touching the ground. In some coastal British Columbia operations, trees were lifted so high that they appeared to float across entire hillsides. This ability changed logging strategy entirely. Areas that could not be roaded, skidded, or safely accessed suddenly became productive. The yarder did the work that gravity and terrain tried to prevent. Crews could harvest massive old-growth timber while minimizing ground disturbance, not out of environmental concern, but because dragging logs simply wasn't possible. Operating a Madill 1222 was a high-risk, high-skill job. Skyline tension was so extreme that anchor trees sometimes failed before the machine showed any signs of strain. Every rigging decision mattered. One mistake could result in snapped cables or violent load shifts. Yet despite the danger, operators trusted the machine because it was built with enormous safety margins in its steel, gearboxes, and braking systems. The Madill 12.2 didn't just push boundaries, it erased them. Even today, it stands as one of the most capable tree-lifting yarders ever created. Number 2. Thunderbird TTY90. The Thunderbird TTY90 is what happens when engineers are told to stop worrying about weight, cost, or practicality, and instead focus purely on strength. Built by Thunderbird, the TTY90 was designed for the most extreme logging conditions imaginable, where lifting entire trees was not a special event, but an everyday requirement. Everything about the TTY90 was oversized. The drums were massive, capable of holding thick skyline cable designed for extreme tension. The braking system was so powerful it could hold gigantic suspended loads motionless in mid-air, a critical capability when rigging adjustments had to be made with trees hanging hundreds of feet above the ground. The tower height provided exceptional lift angles, making full suspension routine rather than exceptional. In operations where multiple full-length trees were yarded at once, the TTY90 thrived. Entire bundles of timber could be lifted clear of the forest floor and transported without drag, reducing hang-ups and increasing production in terrain where no other system could operate efficiently. Crews often described it as overkill, but in the worst conditions, overkill was exactly what was required. The downside was danger. The TTY90 demanded absolute discipline. The forces involved were so extreme that failures were catastrophic when they occurred. Yet the machine itself rarely failed. If something broke, it was usually the rigging, anchors, or the forest itself giving way under stress. The TTY90 represents the peak of brute force yarder design. A machine built not to cooperate with the forest, but to overpower it completely. Number 1. Washington Iron Works 90-foot tower yarder. At the top of the list stands a machine so powerful that it became logging folklore. The 90-foot tower yarder built by Washington Iron Works. This was not just a yarder, it was a declaration of dominance over some of the largest forests ever harvested by humans. The sheer scale of this machine was staggering. Its towering mast allowed lift angles that bordered on vertical, enabling entire old-growth trees to be suspended completely off the ground across enormous spans. These weren't logs, they were full trees, often exceeding 200 feet in length, moving through the air like matchsticks. In some operations, trees were lifted so high they cleared entire ridgelines. What made this yarder truly legendary was its combination of height, cable capacity, and brute force. The skyline drums were enormous, capable of handling extreme cable loads without deformation. The frame was massively overbuilt, designed to survive continuous shock loading that would destroy lesser machines. Crews trusted it with loads that defied common sense because history proved it could take them. The presence of a 90-foot tower yarder changed everything about an operation. Road building could be minimized. Terrain previously labeled unloggable suddenly became productive. Entire mountainsides could be harvested without machines ever touching the ground below. These yarders were dangerous, loud, and unforgiving, but they were also unmatched. No modern logging machine truly replicates the raw lifting power of a Washington Iron Works 90-foot tower yarder. It remains the ultimate symbol of an era when steel, cable, and courage ruled the forest. Those yarders weren't designed to be gentle, they were designed to dominate the forest. They lifted impossible loads, worked on terrain modern machines avoid, and proved that brute force and smart mechanical design could outperform technology. Even today, operators still talk about them with respect and a little fear. Which vintage yarder do you think was the most powerful ever built? Drop your pick in the comments. I read every one. If you respect old-school logging machines and real iron, hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned. Until next time, keep the cables tight, the loads heavy, and the legends alive.